We can hear you well.
Okay, great.
Just continue, and if there is a bit of breakage, we will absolutely sound off for you, Atul. So please go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'll take you all through a presentation that might last 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll spend the remaining time for Q&A. Hope that's all right. Okay. So let's start with what was anyway going on over the last few years. As many of you may already be aware, that the next industrial revolution is a technology revolution. Technology is at the heart of what's going to happen. And whenever there is a revolution, it creates huge amount of impact, sometimes negative, sometimes positive. But what has happened over the last many such industrial revolutions, eventually the positive has been much higher than the negative. So there has been some immediate impact, negative impact, but eventually it gets negated with the positive impact, and the human skill, overall human skill has gone up. Now, there are a bunch of buzzwords that I'm sure all of you have been hearing about over the last many years: artificial intelligence, automation, blockchain, analytics, and the likes. There's hardly any day that our life goes without using at least one of those terms. And there are business objectives that are attached to these technological tools. And many of them are related to the things that you see on the left side of the screen. Increased productivity. We are not talking about 10, 20, 30% productivity. We're talking about multiple times, 10, 20, 100 times in some cases. Just a case in point, a radiologist career used to be a very fine career. It still is. And to become a fine radiologist, it takes a few years. And that to people who are really dedicated, focused, sharp, and at the top of the game. And then they build the knowledge and skills to be able to detect what most people cannot. But with automation, now many diseases can be diagnosed with in a much accurate manner and much faster. So we are talking about not just increased productivity, but also how things become much more advanced. When you're talking about cost management, and by the way, these are just some of the key drivers. These may not necessarily be the only drivers. This is just to give an idea. When we're talking about cost management, just look at us as normal consumers of anything. Our intention to pay for something has gone down significantly. There are so many things we don't pay for. And there was a time each one of us were paying huge amount of money to make international calls or even domestic calls. Nobody pays anymore, right? And all this has happened because the cost management has been revamped with the use of technology. Just to give you one data point, the telcos have lost more than 50 billion US dollars just on text revenue. No, I mean, barring a few things related to, let's say, shipment or a few official notifications, which the banks use, almost everyone uses some app related to text messaging. Then we're talking about greater security. Security is obviously a very subjective thing, but by every passing day, it gets more and more secure. The more information we put on the internet, the more risk we as individuals as well as community takes. But with every passing day, with the evolution of technology, things are getting more and more sophisticated. So while these were the positive business drivers, but obviously it leaves a huge amount of negative impact, at least in the immediate future. For example, there are some surveys that have been put on the right side of the slide, where you can see huge bunch of people are expected to upskill, reskill, cross-skill themselves in insurance industry. And insurance is just one of the many examples. Almost every industry is getting impacted with this, right? Look at the way we buy insurance. Barring life insurance, almost other general insurance packages, we don't have to talk to anyone. With the click of a button, you just buy it. In a place like Singapore now, even when you take a Grab taxi, there is an option to pay 30 cents and you can get insurance done. You just press it and that's you're done. No more talking like the earlier days where you go through the details and all. So it's become extremely simple. Then Obviously, similar impact is happening in manufacturing, retail, every single sector that you talk about. And just look at yourself as a consumer. How are you consuming the services of different sectors? And obviously, you will see the difference that technology has made. I mean, every one of us are spending more time with technology, and particularly with COVID days, than any other individual, right? Even this conversation, the technology is the interface. So it is expected that in the next 10 years or so, around 14% of the global workforce will have to switch their occupational categories, which means they will have to do something other than what they are doing. There is no clear answer what that something else would be, but they have to do something else. And by the way, these are estimates, so it could go up, it could go down. But the important point is who that 14% would be. While there are some trends available right now, but anyone could be. So one has to be prepared for that moment to come, and whoever is ready will be ahead of the game. Now, while all this was going on with technology evolution and the upskilling of human race, all of us were caught with the black swan moment and hit by COVID earlier this year. And the last 7-8 months, the whole world has changed. Something that we used to take for granted, like jumping on a plane. I used to spend almost every week flying, and in the last few months, I had to just do 2 mandatory travel, and that's about it. So obviously, it's having huge amount of impact on airlines. You can see some of the numbers, over $250 billion revenue loss expected. Many of the airlines are going to go bankrupt. Some of the premier airlines are flying at 1% capacity, so it is not sustainable. And this will start impacting. This has already started impacting jobs, but not just the airline, the core sector, but all the associated and adjacent sectors that are linked to aviation. And this is just one example. The same is true for hospitality, retail. But all of you know about all of this, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. But let's just quickly go. So if you look at these two major forces which are causing immediate stress to the workforce, there are a bunch of roles which are getting immediately impacted, but obviously there are many that will continue to get impacted as things evolve, because we live in a dynamic world. What is true today may change tomorrow. But there are a bunch of things, like you can see on the left side. I wouldn't need to name every one of them, and it doesn't mean that these roles won't exist at all. Either the way these roles are done will change, or the numbers will change, but there will be change. That's the whole intent of showing these roles. And there are a bunch of things that are not mentioned, but it would happen as well. For example, with the self-drive vehicles, once it matures and once it is safe, then around half the driver population is expected to be made redundant. And the reason why people will use is, it's not just reduction of cost, it becomes very efficient. For example, if you have a very skilled driver, he or she will still need to take some rest, give some downtime, but if a vehicle is a smooth vehicle, not as much, so which means you're saving on cost, time. But the impact is, the person who's impacted is if you just talk about some of the immediate impacts of COVID, you're seeing a lot of manual services getting impacted. One city, it could be different. Retail executives, transportation, and the likes, right? So there's huge amount of impact. Again, it's just to give the context before I get to the solution. So it's still trying to understand the problem statement before we get to the solutions. So it's not all that bad. I'm an optimist, and um, these are part and parcels of life, and there are things beyond our control. So these things have happened, but the human race has shown time and again that how resilient they are, and how they have come out of it stronger in every crisis. So my expectation is it's not going to be any different this time. Yes, it may take longer time. It will still be a lot painful, particularly people who are impacted, people who've lost lives. It's very unfortunate, but eventually things will turn around. It may be different as the overused word called new normal. It may be a new normal, but eventually people will come out of it. Now look at the way the trends are changing, and this is where, from the realities that I talked in the last few slides. Now it's kind of, the tone is getting into a more neutral tone. The shifting of the businesses, right? So I was giving example of how many people like me are not traveling anymore, but the surface transport and the goods transport from different countries is still continuing. Most people are doing more e-commerce than ever. It's safer. It obviously saves time and it's efficient. And you look at the volume of e-commerce items, it's just gone up. They still need to recruit, because while we may be interfacing with the e-commerce company through just a mobile phone, but there's a huge amount of supply chain, and they have to be enhanced at every single chain of the supply chain. So there will be job demand. There is job demand. It's just shifting from a physical retail store or a passenger store to something else. Same way when you're talking about hotels. Now many hotels are being used as patient care because of the patient volume going up significantly. The hospitals, particularly in developing countries, are just not equipped to handle such large volumes. This was a black swan moment. No one expected these kind of numbers. So not just hotels, but other such facilities, they are converted to patient care facilities. People who were flight attendants are able to do similar customer care roles, where now the stakeholders are different. In place of an airline passenger, maybe it's a patient looking for care, maybe it's a person who's looking for some proactive health advice. So it's shifting that's taking place. And I think retail and e-commerce, I anyway just talked about. You can see some data as to how the online sales have gone up significantly. The last one is something that I believe will have a very, very big impact. It's telehealth and all the associated ecosystems along with telehealth. Now, I don't know if it has happened with you, but even in normal times, most of the time when I felt sick, it was during odd hours. It was during hours where the chances of getting a clinic open was very low. Fortunately, it hasn't happened for many years. And that's where one gets desperate to have somebody on the call one could trust. And this is where different technology components would come together to make it not just accurate, but also 24/7. I don't have to worry about changing clinics because my records would be available. I don't have to worry about changing doctors because it's all stored there. The whole family history is known. And telehealth is going to hire a lot of people of all kinds, not just doctors, but different people. Because the reason I use the term associated ecosystem is not just the advice that you get from the doctors, but the pharmacy. In developing countries, one of the big issues, or even underdeveloped countries, one of the big issues is having fake medicines. This can track it much more accurately. Obviously, for people with bad intents, even there it may not be foolproof, but it will still give a much more stable option. So there will be a switch from where the current working mode, let's say people working in hospitals or different care industries, customer care jobs, move towards this. I may not spend enough time on this one, but we'll spend a minute or two on the following slide. So we've talked about different sectors. Now, just to give you one example, in Singapore, recently I ordered some food from a particular restaurant, and maybe I made a mistake or the app had some error. It picked up a self pickup option. So while I did not have any intention to go, but I had no option, and then I took a taxi and went to the restaurant that was showing in the app. And guess what? When I reached the restaurant, it was closed. And that's where you realize that while some of these online apps are using the restaurant names, but they may not necessarily be using the restaurant. they may be using industrialized kitchen, and that's where, the second picture that you see, the industrialized real estate will go up, the centralized kitchen will go up. Yes, there will be branding needed, but if you look at some of the companies which have come up in the last 2-3 years with with centralized kitchens, some of them are moving towards becoming a unicorn. So not just this, but even e-commerce or anything else, e-pharmacy, industrialized real estate is going to be very, very big. Um, Not something that's fancy, but just nice buildings, something that's good on logistics. Another example that I'll take is on e-learning. Even this is an example of e-learning. Gone are the days where you could just join a class and have an in-person participation. At least in most countries. Fortunately, in Singapore, you can still do to some extent. But in most countries, people, either it's closed or people are hesitant. And e-commerce, e-learning has gone up significantly. The advantage of e-learning is you don't have to worry whether that option is locally available physically or not. It can be in the US, Europe, anywhere in the world, as long as you like what you need. It's available everywhere. And you can go to the best of universities, subscribe to a course and just do it. You don't have to really restrict yourself to what's available locally. I wouldn't bother you with other examples in some of the other pictures that's mentioned in this slide. So how will it require reskilling? And one of the statements that I really like is about continuously learning and unlearning and relearning. And many times we forget to unlearn because of the baggage of what we know. I think it is extremely important, particularly in current times. If we have too much of burden of what we know, it is much harder to accept and reconcile that it is not relevant. But if it is not relevant, it is better to unlearn, give it up, and learn something that's relevant, because the context of relevance has changed a lot. So here are some of the examples in terms of manual service workers. Again, we talked about how technology is evolving. So their jobs may be there, but it will be hugely assisted by technology. I mean, you can take a similar example of a car. I'm not even talking about a self-driven car, but normal. You can take any car. It is strongly influenced by technology. So the technology is being used to assist, get the driver drive better, safer. It's the same with manual workers. So they will have to reskill in adoption of the technology, ensuring that they know how best to use the technology to be able to do their job in the best possible manner. We talked briefly about e-learning. Now, as e-learning is already picking up, it will continue to be there. The demand for content will continue to be there. It is not a static thing. People will continue to need more and more content, fresh content, contextualized to my need. If I am a person of a particular age, of a particular context, I don't need standard content. I need personalized content. So this will be a huge area of demand. Voiceovers. If I am used to a particular kind of accent, if I need to learn something in my mother tongue, all those things should be possible. So there will be a huge demand for this these kind of skills. So the moment people are able to their relevance will increase. The same is true for some of the other ones. Again, given the limited time, I wouldn't get into every example. This is the I remember when people used to look at career, but particularly a generation ahead of us, they knew exactly what is going to happen 25, 30 years from the time they started their career. They could plan entirely. So, you could think of being a pilot who could see clear skies and see far ahead, that knew exactly where we are going. But I think it's going to change to becoming an explorer now. It's very hard to know what will happen next, right? You can think of a person or, climbing Mount Everest or any such exploratory you wouldn't know what would happen. You start your journey, you go for some distance, and suddenly something happens and you have to change. And that's what I was talking about: learning, unlearning, and relearning. So anyone who is comfortable with ambiguity, anyone who's comfortable with unknown, will certainly have a higher chance to face some of these uncertain situations. And I would like to finish with a positive note, that when nothing is sure, everything is possible. So on that note, I really thank you for being such a nice audience, patient hearing, and I'd love to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Atul. I thought that was really insightful. I think the biggest thing that stood out for me is when you said one of the biggest trend in change is over the next 10 years, everyone will have to switch their occupation. That's shocking news to me. I've been in the workforce for about 20, little bit more years. And what does that mean for someone that's been in the industry that I'm in? And how do I actually look to transform that? So I've got a question that is in association to preparing to upskill. So I have someone here that's asking, how should I upskill my knowledge and skills to get ready for job changes? Online courses like LinkedIn, Udemy, or only certification courses from universities and colleges? So that's being a little bit practical.
Right. Thanks for your kind words and the question. So, and this is something that's very important for everyone who's looking for that change. So, I'm personally quite open about whether you take certifications or you learn through any other means that you just mentioned, because I think we are moving away from certifications and degrees to more skill based. Still, the reality is that people do look for some confirmation, and certification or degree is more like a confirmation endorsement that this person knows this. But very soon we are moving towards a skill-based option, and many of you may have already come across this Google release a few days back, which talks about the, I forget what's the amount, I think of just a few $100s, and you can land a very, very good job for freshers. So I think just continuously upgrading your skills is much more important than certification. That's just a personal view, but that doesn't mean certification is any less, because many employers are still looking for certification. So keep the right balance, but having the knowledge and skill, I would say, is much more important than having just a piece of paper. That's number one. Number two is, what do you learn, right? And I think that's not an easy that may be an important question, but the answer is never easy. In my opinion, what one should learn is something that's adjacent to one's skill base and close to one's interest, right? So for example, if I'm a customer care executive and if I try to be a programmer, everything is possible, but it's just more difficult. If the fundamentals are not known, it's just more difficult. So something that comes naturally to me, if I do something adjacent and learn something adjacent, which are more in demand for the jobs in demand, I think much better. So those are the two things that I would say in response to your question. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. We have a bit more of a broader question. Can you tell us what type of roles are going to be in demand between 5 and 10 years from now? And what does, and to back that up, what can one do to help prepare them for transformation in those roles?
Right. So I'll give the example of a few industries, because I'm not sure people from which industries are participating in the session. So certainly one role that will one area or one role that will continue to be in demand would be technologies. I mean, if you see, one common theme of most slides that I presented or whatever I talked was technology, and maybe because I belong to this industry. So the technology roles will continue to be there, at least in the foreseeable future, right? There's so much happening. Everything is getting digitized. Every industry is influenced by technology. So anyone who's getting into technology space, you have to just pick what you like, but that will continue to be in demand. Second, healthcare. Now, if you look at just the American healthcare system, the world GDP is around 78 trillion or somewhere thereabouts.
Mm.
US healthcare spend is 3.3 trillion. I come from India. It's more than the GDP of India, right? So with with all that's happening, healthcare will continue to have much more demand in terms of people who are required. Everywhere there is a gap in terms of medical workers, in terms of doctors, and with what we have seen in COVID, I mean, these people are heroes. They have done phenomenal. But but is it fair that someone is being away from family for months, right? It's just because we don't have enough people. So everyone related to the ecosystem, the doctors, nurses, pharmacists, all these specialists who are related to diagnosis, I think that will be other area where the demand would continue to go up. The third one is supply chain.
Mm.
And this is related to the e-commerce example that we talked about. And while e-commerce, immediately we think about buying some goods, but if you're talking about e-commerce, it's everything related to you either getting a food option, you're consuming any other service online. So the whole supply chain is continuing to be hugely in demand, while all we see is millions of items in a particular app when we try to buy something, but the real infrastructure is behind it. So I think supply chain will continue to be hugely in demand.
Yeah.
I'm just restricting myself to top three that I believe, but obviously, different sectors will continue to have different demands. These are not the only sectors, but in my mind, these are certainly the sectors that will have huge demands.
And to back that up, then, in terms of preparation for transformation, what are the top maybe two to three things that you would recommend professionals do in order to help prepare them for the shift in their career?
Sure, no, absolutely. That's a very good question. Thanks for asking. So I think soft skills are not something that you can expect the machines to do. You can't expect technology to do, right? When there was this joke that there are so many cases of technology beating a star sports person, but there was no happiness when the machine won, right? So I think the soft skills will continue to be in demand. The negotiation skills, communication skills, the ability to navigate method in madness, right? While I was talking about ambiguity, somebody's got to come out of it, right? People will need that personal attention, so that human connect. So the soft skills are continuing to be very important, that cannot be replaced by technology. So that's on one side. When you're talking about hard skills, while on one side you can look at some of the sectors that I talked about, if you are in the beginning of your career, then it's much easier because you can pick any of these options or anything that you feel passionate about. But if you are in middle of the career or later part of the career, then it is best to look at some adjacent options. Whatever is your skill. So suppose you are a customer care executive, be it through call center, in person, or any kind of customer care. Some of the examples that I gave will continue to need customer care. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
using technology, the learning of using to technology is going to be very important. And above all of this, I think the most important skill that each one of us need to have is the learnability. Sometimes we miss out and get too bogged down by learning, but learnability is even more important than learning, so that we continue to push ourselves to learn new things, and the things that are irrelevant just put at the back of our mind.
All right, Atul, thank you so much for that insight and sharing it with us, how to prepare for transformation. Above all else, sort of keeping our eyes open and, keeping our fingers on the pulse of our careers, maintaining resilience, upskilling at the right place at the right time. So thank you so much for that, Atul. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll join us again.
Thank you very much. You all have a
Thank you. Okay.